So let's talk about appropriate selection of native plants. So we're going to not going to provide examples of some of the Western native plants that are suitable for Nevada landscapes. These plants will do the following. They'll support other species such as pollinators and birds. They're attractive and they're adaptable. They perform well in residential landscape conditions. And importantly, they are available from plant nurseries. The following, I'm going to show you in the following slides, some really nice native plants that I think would do well in Nevada. But there are only a few of the many native species that could be used in Nevada landscapes. We do have more resources that will give you ideas for other plants provided at the end of this video and in your Master Gardener Handbook. So make sure you look at some of those websites and maybe get your hands on some of the books that we recommend. So one of the concepts that we use for planting any kind of landscape is designing by microclimate. As I mentioned, in Nevada, we have a lot of microclimates, and even at the scale of your own yard, you might have microclimates that are different in sun exposure or shade or reflected heat and light, wind, or soil variability. Okay, so every landscape is going to be its own little ecosystem in itself. It is going to have microclimates. So you may have to put different species and select them so that they can survive in that part of your landscape. For example, you don't want to put a plant that requires full sun in a shady part of your landscape on the north side of a home, for example, where the sun rarely gets to. So in selecting native plants in Nevada, there are three main zones that you want to consider. The montane zone, otherwise known as the mountain zone, occurs from 6,000 to 9,000 feet. And so this zone has greater precipitation. The soils are shallow and rocky, and so native plants that are native to this zone are going to be adapted to those conditions. And so you'll want to look in your landscape for areas that will mimic those kinds of conditions, so those plants will feel right at home and be able to thrive. The foothill zone occurs between 4,000 and 7,000 feet. At this level, even though precipitation is not that much different from the montane zone, you do have higher temperatures. And so plants tend to lose water more quickly and will need to be watered more frequently. Also, the soils in this zone are well drained. And then the desert zone is from 3,000 to 6,000 feet. And at this level, you've got low precipitation levels and very high temperatures with soils that are rocky and sometimes even salty. So these are general plant communities that exist in our natural areas. For landscape design purposes, the microclimates that I'm discussing here correspond to these three main plant communities that occur in our natural areas. The other thing that you should pay attention to, in the following slides, we're going to talk about some of the plants that are native to these three zones. And all of the slides will indicate something called a hardiness zone rating. So if you live in the northern part of the state or at higher elevation, you should really pay attention to the hardiness zone rating of your plant, which I've listed on each of the slides, and make sure it fits in the hardiness zone in which you live. If you don't know what hardiness zone you live in, you can visit the website on this slide, planthardiness.ars.usda.gov, and that will allow you to zone in or zoom in and find out what zone you live at so that you can select plants that can survive the winter in your area. This won't apply to all parts of the state, but many parts of the state will have to consider this, especially if they're planting plants that they would like to survive more than 1 year. So let's start with plants that are native to the montane zone. And plants in this zone are used to certain kinds of conditions, which we can replicate by making sure that we mulch with some type of organic material, such as shredded bark or wood chips. These plants like a little bit extra water, so we're going to be watering them during the growing season once or twice a week, again, depending on what part of the state you live in and at what elevation you're at. These plants may also benefit from amendment of the soil with compost to give a little bit more nutrients, because up in mountainous areas, you're going to have a lot of tree species that are dropping leaves and other organic materials onto the soil, which get into the soil and make it much more organic than some of the soils that are at lower elevations or in the desert parts of the state. And then some of the species that are native to this region may also tolerate partial shade, which is great if you've got a microclimate in your landscape that's shady. So let's start with bristlecone pine, Pinus longeva, which is native to subalpine regions, very high elevation regions in California, Nevada, and Utah. Bristlecone pine can get to 25 feet tall and 20 feet wide, but it grows very, very slowly. So it takes a while to get to those heights. And so it takes some time. If you're going to put it into your landscape, it'll take a little while before it will fill out that area of your landscape. It grows slowly, but it lives a long time. It also has these needles that holds onto its needles for about 10 years, which gives an interesting bottle brush appearance to the branches, thus the name bristlecone pine. And so it's a great species. Like many mountain species, it needs very well-drained soil for best growth, but it seems to perform adequately at lower, hotter elevations, even though it's actually native to very high elevations. And as a benefit, it also provides habitat for food and small birds and mammals, but it is shade intolerant, so make sure you've got a nice sunny spot to put it in. Gamble oak is another great species. Quercus gambellii, native to the arid west and southwest, can get to up to 25 feet tall and 20 feet wide. So gamble oak is a small multi-trunked tree with an irregular crown that's best planted in groups as a screen. So it grows naturally in groups and can be planted in groves, as is shown on the slide, or on the slide in the picture at the bottom of the slide. And it can be used as a screen or even for shade. Keep plants away from buildings and thin them regularly, though, because they can be a wildfire risk if you allow them to become straggly and don't keep them well pruned and trained. The nice thing about this plant is that it has attractive glossy leaves that turn reddish brown in the fall, and the trees can provide shelter for wildlife and harbor insects as a food source for the birds. So great tree for our landscape. Another great plant is hardy geranium, Geranium viscosissimum. This is native to Nevada, California, Utah, and Colorado. It can grow from 10 inches to 26 inches tall and wide. It has beautiful flowers that occur in pairs, and the petals have nectar guides that attract bees and lead them to their food source. This plant would look great on a wooded lot as an understory species or as an alternative to annuals. Once established, it'll go without water much of the summer if it's kept in the shade. If you put it in the sun, it can become straggly and it sprawls. So be careful about that. It likes the shade. Also, if you overwater it, it will sprawl as well. So be careful that you aren't overwatering this plant. If you have it in the sun, you probably want to give it a little extra water. But if you have it in the shade, you can back off on the water. So, and that's true of many plants, but this one in particular seems to be pretty sensitive to overwatering. But it does have a high drought tolerance, and you'd be surprised, even though it looks like it's not drought tolerant, it actually is pretty drought tolerant. The birds love the seeds, and the flowers are pollinated by butterflies and native bees. Limber pine is a tree that's native to very high elevation subalpine areas in the West. This is Pinus flexilis. It grows to about 35 feet tall and 30 feet wide. It's a high elevation species that gets its name from its flexible branches. So Pinus flexilis, it has flexible branches that readily shed snow. It also withstands high wind and can be used as a screen or a windbreak. Very, very cold hardy all the way down to zone 2. So if you live in the far northern reaches of the state, this tree should survive the winter with absolutely no problem. Should be irrigated weekly during the growing season, however, because it is a high elevation species, it's used to a little bit extra moisture. And it produces pine nuts, which provide critical food for small mammals and birds. And there are cultivars available. So this photograph shows a picture of van der Waals pyramid limber pine, which you can see is a very beautiful species for an urban landscape. Another great one is showy daisy, Erigeron speciosus. This is native to the Intermountain West and Pacific Northwest. It grows to about 3.5, 3.5 inches tall. So it's not a very tall species, but it does spread. It performs best in the cooler regions of Nevada. So if you live in southern Nevada, this might not be the species that you would select. Here's a perennial that bees absolutely love because of those open flowers that look like landing pads. And so it's very easy for the bee to land on it and then access the nectar. It does come in a lot of different varieties, pink, purple, blue, white, but be careful because some of the cultivars are not appropriate for use if you're trying to create a habitat for wildlife. Avoid the double flower varieties in particular if you want to attract and support those native wildflowers or those native pollinators.